Welcome to the All Things Circular podcast, your gateway to the circular economy. Hosted by industry experts Victoria Darcy and Rich Bulger. Every episode is proof that circularity isn't just good for the planet. It's a smart business decision. Our mission is simple: to empower, to inform, and to show you how to make the circular economy work for you.
All right, hello and welcome to All Things Circular. I'm Rich Bulger.
I'm Vic Darcy.
And we are here with our new friend, Stephanie Krubsack. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so you are a podcaster. You've got a passion and a voice around sustainability and wellness, and you're very well traveled on the speaking circuit. So could you please introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I've been in the sustainability and wellness space for quite a long time. And my why story would be that I grew up on a tree preserve. So a reforestation program in the 90s under the CRP program. So I always grew up in nature and surrounded by that, wellness too, organic gardening. So I really use that to forge my career path. So helping brands in the wellness industry and then in sustainability to help them operationally that way too. And as a very creative person, I like to share all of that via my magazine and podcast called Person and Planet.
Oh, that's great, Stephanie. I mean, we've been fortunate that we've had a chance to catch up before, and and I love your backstory. I mean, growing up on a tree preservation, I love that because I'm such a very outdoorsy person. But can you sort of tell us, what drives you in your journey in and around sustainability and circularity? Why do you do what you do? What's your passion? And, where have you come from? Where are you now? And where do you want to go to?
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely been a journey, but probably one of the biggest things that keeps me going is really seeing the results. So we can say things, we can do things are always changing, but when we, let's say, go in and, have an article or a podcast episode or do a workshop with a company, what are the actual results after? So I'm really big into looking at what is the effect and that aha moment when you say, oh, do you know that even as a tech company you can operate a little more sustainable? Or as a manufacturer, you can look at your supply chain and pick better options. And back to the circular economy, do you know that if you look at things as like a closed loop instead of linear, so it becomes trash at the end, that you can change X, Y, and Z? And even in your day-to-day life, like even if you're not a business owner, what are you using in your kitchen? Are you using plastic versus glassware, things like that, to look at, the aha moments of, oh, I didn't know I could do that. It's like very small things that you can take control of to make change. And I think sometimes there's so much, especially right now, there's so much content, right, that it can be overwhelming and we don't know where to start, where we freeze. So I just encourage people to start small. And yeah, with that, it's always shifting and evolving. And I know from like both of your backgrounds, all that you've been working in different industries and organizations where you're helping them become more circular ultimately. And, even in my profession too, having kind of an eclectic background where I worked in manufacturing for almost 14 years, in paper, in automotive, in food, in tech, software selection, business process improvement, and then always leaning back into the marketing side, the sustainability side. I would be that person, for example, when I worked at a tech company in Denver, where I would go into the break room and say, why are there styrofoam cups here? We can do better. Why can't we have mugs? Why can't we have reusable silverware? We have a dishwasher. Do we need a dishwasher? I mean, things like that, where I just constantly look at that how can we do better? So not just accepting things as how they are, but how to improve it. And I always think there's always an opportunity for improvement. And back to the circular economy, I was thinking very creatively about this actually last night, where the whole ripple effect, where let's say a drop of water falls into a lake and you have that circle, but that circle just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So it's almost like the communication of it just keeps growing and it doesn't stop. So back to that like circular economy where maybe you already have a closed loop system, but you can always make it a little bit better. So I think it's just that drive where I'm always going into any situation and looking at how can we fix that? How can we make it better? Looking at the statistics, and how do you communicate that in a creative way? And I think that's half of it as well too, with working in manufacturing, getting more into marketing. And when you have these goals for an organization, that you really educate your team members in a fun way, and not just having an iron fist where these are our rules, these are our goals, but how do you actually apply that to your daily life? And back to what I'm doing, moving forward to what I'm doing today with companies where I go in and work on a waste reduction workshop and growing their green team, having a fun workshop where they get to look at their department. What are we purchasing? Maybe we're buying too much of X, Y, and Z. What can we immediately cut off to save money? And that's just so effective to have it presented in a fun way, but underlyingly educational too. So you're bringing people in, you're being engaging, and then you're ultimately hitting all of your business goals that way, not just sustainability, it's really everything that's connected. So yeah, kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but just how that's all connected together to what I'm working on presently.
Great. One of the things that I loved about getting to know you, Stephanie, was you do have a very eclectic background. As you mentioned, you worked in different industries and different roles. Marketing, you're able to go through and speak to doing what's right for the environment and what generates positive business results, which is really important to affect change, especially now. But one thing you didn't mention that I found fascinating from our previous conversations was your studies around legal and law. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I did have a stint in law school, so I will say that it was a really interesting experience. And as a creative, growing up in Wisconsin, I always like to joke playing in the dirt, where growing up in this tree farm, always outside, always creating, painting, building things, and always being intrigued by the legal side. But once I was in it, it was really interesting to look at the brain shift I needed, where I would think 10 directions or 10 steps every direction, in front, on the sides, behind, and looking at, all the stats I had and looking at the problem and then finding a solution. But with the law, it's very much like this is what the law is, and you have to be creative within that confined space. And that was very challenging for me, but I will say it helped me become more analytical and not just a full creative. So I think it gave me that business mindset that I needed to move forward and to move into entrepreneurship. So it was not a great fit for me, but I think it was a really good brain training exercise, I will say. And my first job after grad school was actually for an automotive manufacturer, and government contracts was a big part of it. So that helped me really lean into learning more about manufacturing, and there was a lot of education and training part of that role too. So I think that helped satisfy some of that creative side and educating others.
Oh, that's great, Stephanie. Thanks. I actually listened to a few episodes of your podcast, which I found wonderful, and the way that you connect the people and the planet. And I think one of the themes that I'd like to explore with you is really about actions, and you've already touched on it. Sustainability, circularity, and the self. You were just saying how when you work with businesses, you make it less dictatorial and more collaborative in terms of, how we can change, how we look at change. But do you want to just explain to some of our listeners about, how you've had people get their kids involved, how you've sort of taken the essence and the idea of small changes to collectively make a bigger change?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the workshops I gave was very much reducing waste at home and at the office. So it was a really fun exercise where you could go in with your team, or you could take this at home with your family to have it more of like a activity you do at home and bring back. And that specific podcast episode is really great because the individual did this exercise with her 2 young boys. So they chose their bathroom, and they had paper cups like for mouthwash, rinsing their mouth. And she said, why do we have these throwaway cups, these single-use cups? We can have, everybody has their own cup or their own glass cup there. Things like that, and looking at, is the soap we're using healthy? Are there any chemicals in it? There shouldn't be there. So just taking it very bite-sized and looking at one room at a time in your home. So that was a really fun exercise where it got her kids thinking about, oh, like this is really interesting. And then it just creates this ripple effect and it becomes their normal because they're exposed to it at a very young age. And I think that's really important because, working with kids in workshops, and I have a children's book I know we talked about earlier too, about healthy eating, composting, urban gardening, where you just expose kids to this to a really young age and they say, oh, okay. And then they can, come back to their parents and ask, why don't we compost? Why don't we recycle? Because they know that is an option. And I really think that children are partly a product of their environment and what they're exposed to. And even in their schools, a recent project with a public school system on waste from their school lunches and things like that, where if everything is in single-use plastic, that becomes their normal. And it's just really important to, educate that shouldn't be the normal. And I know things have changed and been extra challenging since COVID because of the sanitary reasons, but that single-use plastic should not be the first choice in any case.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. One of the themes that I like to talk with my peer group around isn't around food wastage, and particularly because certainly over here there are areas of food poverty, and for me it's almost like we seem to have lost as a society the ability to look at ingredients and to create something from the ingredients versus going to the counter and picking up that super processed food that is convenient, that's in the plastic, in the packaging, but can be put in the oven for 10 minutes and then voila, you've got a pizza, versus having the flour, the dough, the flour, the eggs and the water to make the dough to make the pizza, which is infinitely better for you, and actually is creating this self-sufficiency as well. But the other thing I wanted to just draw on, and again, it was something that you'd spoken about, was, when people look at making these small changes, and let's just apply it to electronics for a second, and the likes of, you mentioned a dishwasher, and perhaps, the more energy efficient products can be slightly more expensive. But if you begin to look at things economically, because they are more efficient, you're going to be using less energy. And certainly over in the UK, I think we've got the highest energy prices in the world currently. So again, it's getting people to just think about not just, okay, I've got X budget, I need a dishwasher, therefore I'm going to go and purchase this one, which is my budget. Maybe just to begin to apply different principles to say, well, actually, this one is better. Why is it better? And in the long run, what am I going to achieve by maybe investing slightly more? But actually, as we're all sort of in business, we're used to doing ROIs, which is return on investment, for anybody that's not kind of there, but actually something that's more energy efficient will end up paying for itself, ultimately. And I suppose, it's educating people to see beyond the convenience, to see beyond the quick decision, and to apply a little bit more thought. So, with that in mind, do you want to kind of expand a little bit on sort of how you take those approaches with the businesses that you work within and some successes that you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting point you make about looking at efficiencies and the investment and the myth that sustainability costs more. So a really interesting point I like to bring up is that I worked with a sustainable investment firm here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and looking at a 30-plus year study about standard investments versus those vetted via ESG standards. So looking at eliminating risk and making sure that employees were treated kindly, paid fair wages. Environmentally, they're taking action, they're involved in the community. So basically, you're reducing or eliminating risk when you operate this way, and that these stocks performed over 10% better. So over a 30-year study, and now it's been updated to 35 years. So it's just really interesting to look at the underlying facts. And to your point that maybe you make a small investment now to hire a fractional consultant if you don't have a sustainability officer on your team, but you're doing this, you have a workshop where you're educating your team on, hey, we should start to think this way. And once you get everybody on board, your employees might think, oh, actually, we're working with this supplier. Maybe there's one that's actually more environmental that we can work with that's actually going to reduce our packaging costs because they do X, Y, and Z. So there's so many opportunities that when you have that slight mind shift, it just has that ripple effect, which was mentioned before, that it applies to every aspect of the company, and that it doesn't have to cost more, because Exhibit A, companies do perform better. They have higher revenue, longer longevity as far as their business. And yeah, so it's just like looking at the facts again, but also having those success stories where I'll refer back to that client workshop where their green team grew from just a couple individuals to 35 within 3 months. So basically having this workshop, seeing what happened, and then I had them on the podcast and I said, let's talk about the results. And then over 50% of their North American facilities had the proper recycling and receptacles and composting on site. 50% in 3 months. That's very significant for a large number of facilities for over 2,000 employees. So just looking at the facts and saying, this does work, that we had this fun workshop. They could take with their team, their department, they could take it at home and just start to look at the small things, because ultimately that gives everybody their own unique power to make a change. You feel more connected to the greater mission. And that would be another point to make too, that capitalism can feel super individualistic, and I think that we need to change that and think more collectively of that ripple effect of, so what does my action have on the next person, the next generation, on the planet, on people? Because whatever product you create and put out into the world, the end life of that, the recycling of it, the non-recycling of it, is also defined. You're defining what happens there. So that's always important to keep in mind, but also to not point fingers too much or get too much on the negative side, because that does not do anybody any favors either. I think most of us are doing the best that we can with what we have, right, infrastructurally. So educating instead of informing, and then doing it in a kind way that's also fun. Because why not make everything a little bit more fun and interesting, and it's more easily digestible too that way.
I was doing a keynote at a conference in Amsterdam, and I do find that Europe is more ahead in legislation and consumer acceptance of being cognizant of your environment than we are here in the US. Our technology is more advanced than in Europe, so there's some plays off of each other. But there was a younger person that was on the panel with a whole bunch of people my age or older talking about transformation. And the moderator asked the panel, how do you see shopping and consumer behavior changing? What are things that you would be looking at if you were, say, going into a grocery store? And the younger person on the panel said, well, what I'd love to see in addition to the price is the carbon footprint of the produce I'm buying, because I would rather pay more to have less harm. And you heard this audible eyes rolling, and it was like, I can't believe this kid's talking about it. He doesn't get it. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, he's going to be the one with the most money in his pocket in a few years. And if their buying patterns are purpose over price, I saw through my roles at both Verizon and Cisco, the gradual shift in studies that we were doing for why people chose our company to work. And when I started and entered this market, and Vic the same, it was stability and it was economics. What am I going to be paid? That were the primary motivating factors. Now it's purpose over price. Deloitte did a study that over 70% of Gen Z and millennials are aware of their carbon footprint and are taking steps to go through and do things about it. So from a business perspective, when you were talking about the cups in the break room, I remember seeing those for the first time, and the feeling that I had that, man, it's just so much easier to go through and grab a cup and throw it away. My time's important. And when I went to Europe and we were washing cups and the mugs when we were getting coffee for one of the last podcasts that we talked about, and all the receptacles were separate, and it was just the way that things were done. I admired that change, but I thought about how long it had been, 10, 15 years since I saw the first cups in the break room and we started getting away from the consumer model. Stephanie, what do you think the next evolution is? Because I'm one of those people that follows the economics, and it's a cherry on top when it's environmentally and economically beneficial. It's one of the things I love about this business is you can do both at the same time often. But what do you see as the evolution, the next evolution in a sustainable or a green workplace?
Yeah, I think maybe another topic to bring up would be recycling. So I think the next revolution might be refusal. Because, for example, we do things oftentimes because they've been done that way for years and years. And so let's look at the straw. So I created a fun piece of content recently where I, brought my own straw, a stainless steel one, which, right, you can bring that with you, stick it in your pocket, so you're not using one. But it was more so making a point that you don't really need a straw. Like, why is it so common practice to get a straw with your cup of water? Like, do you really need it? No, absolutely not. So I think that's just one example, very small example, and that's very debatable topic right now, politically, with the straw. But looking at, why, just analyzing why are we doing it that way? Just stepping back, any small action that seems absolutely normal, and looking at why are we doing this way? Do we even need this? And again, like another simple thing, moving from paper to electronic. And I know in Europe, yes, that's not done many places yet. I lived in Germany recently. They're doing many things amazingly, like their solar is progress is stellar. They have green communities that are not drivable. They have central recycling systems. I mean, so many amazing things, but everything's a paper trail yet. But yeah, just looking at, what can we do a little bit differently? So I think refusal might be the next trend, because it's almost like the, reduce, reuse, recycle. But I think refuse is one that's popped up as like a newer term that not everybody's looking at. So refusal and reuse, I think, are the bigger. And again, with the circular economy, a lot of work that you're doing, the take back programs, the reuse is huge and significant, because ultimately recycling is a broken system. There are certain municipalities that do it very, very well. Many do not. And that's probably a whole nother podcast episode, because you could live on one street and across the road there's a different company that takes different numbers of recycling, like 1, 2, and 5 versus 1 through 7. So that's a whole nother thing. And the percentage of items that actually get recycled is so low. So I think just refusal and just looking at what are we doing initially, and even back to bringing it back around to manufacturing, your supply chain and packaging that. Maybe your raw product can be in a reusable tote versus a single-use plastic wrap or something to that effect, where there's just so many things you can initially refuse and push back. Another small example I'll give you, I hosted an event for Climate Week in New York end of last year, and I was very thoughtful of the whole event. I said I do not want name tags. I encourage everybody to connect via the QR codes on LinkedIn, and shake hands, exchange names, information, and then also what are we serving? So I asked the firm that so graciously hosted us, I said, instead of plastic bottles for our attendees, can you have water carafes in actual glasses? And they said, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a small ask that you push back and say, can we do this a little bit differently? And it was just asked out of kindness and like saying, we're so grateful you're sponsoring this event for us, but could you do that? Because that fits our mission. That's what we believe in. And they did. So we didn't have any single-use plastic water bottles for the event, which was huge. Over 100 attendees. So it's just like small things like that to really look at. And even if you can't collectively look at your company in entirety, because that can be overwhelming, and take it step by step. Start with one event at a time. How can you make that event more sustainable? And that's been a really big focus this year, helping companies too, looking at how can we reduce that imprint or footprint from just one event at a time, and then go from there.
Yeah, I love that actually. So the refuse, it's almost like they say there's the 3 R's of the circular economy, and actually there was a study done by an institute in the Netherlands who actually said there were 9. Because there's 3 within the 3 of the reduced, reuse, recycle. There's actually 3 subcategories within the 3. But then somebody came out and said, actually, there's 10 because the first one is refuse. And so you point about the straw, plastic straw, paper straw, actually no straw. That's the answer. And they try and saying that to my 7-year-old, right? It's not going to happen. But one thing I really wanted to draw on that you said so beautifully there, Stephanie, was one thing at a time. Take one learning at a time. And actually go and research it. Go and learn about it. I mean, the paper straw was, I think, a shock to everybody. That actually, the paper straw it's not as good as people made it out to be. They don't work. It's only one's ever tried to actually drink out of one for any period of time. I mean, and I had one recently, which was a post on LinkedIn, and it was from somebody from Coca-Cola. And they were saying, okay, out of these three receptacles, which one do you think is the least green? And it was a plastic bottle. It was the aluminium can or aluminum can for you guys over there, and the glass. And so I'll pose the question to you both. Which one of those three receptacles is the least green?
I might say the glass, actually, depending on, because the weight of shipping it and the production of it. So I would have to know the facts of where it's being produced and things like that. But that would probably be my guess.
Okay, Rich, any guess?
See, my head was going back to when I was a kid drinking out of a hose in someone's yard. When you were talking about your 7-year-old, I'm like, how was I drinking at 7 through a hose? And then you're saying, well, how clean was that? But we were all okay. I've seen products move from place to place, and I don't wipe down the lid of a soda can when I go through and take a drink out of it. I just pop it open. But the point that you're bringing up, that there are things that could contaminate. Vic, I would have no guess, but I would say that most of them were probably cleaner than the hoses I drank out of.
Well, actually, sorry, yeah, my point was which one's the least green, not the least clean. It's the least green. Okay. So the plastic, the aluminium, or the glass, which one do you think is the least green?
I think the plastic.
Well, Stephanie was right, but not for the reasons that you think. And the reason why Stephanie is right is because the glass isn't reused. If the glass was reused, it would leapfrog and it would become the most green, but it isn't. The glass is recycled. And so those processes of circularity are leapfrogged. So in other words, and it's because it takes such an amount of heat to break down the glass, to reheat the glass, to remake the glass, to reproduce the glass. And I was really floored by that, actually, because I always choose glass bottles, always, over plastic. And actually, yeah, it's not the greenest. So to tie it back to what Stephanie was saying, learn about something. Challenge your behaviors, challenge what you think, and actually learn about it. Because I think with a little bit of learning, and share your information, help educate others, because this is how collectively we will begin to change. One person on their own, we can all recycle. Some people do, some people don't, and contamination is a really big problem in recycling, because those that don't create a massive contamination issue, which means the rest of the people that did may as well not have done, because it's been contaminated. So it's got to be this collective. We have to kind of, come together with purpose as individuals. I always say sustainability starts with the self. And the same with circularity. Look at, if your organization can't tell you what they're doing with their obsolete IT assets, they need to be able to tell you what they're doing with them. If you haven't got mugs and, physical receptacles in your canteen, ask for them, speak to HR, change. I think these are really important topics, because for me, I think a lot of apathy, and Rich knows, one of my biggest bugbears about this whole industry is apathy. Doesn't matter, next person down the line will fix it. I'm not going to be in this job for very long. I don't need to bother about it. And apathy, is a big problem, because if we're all apathetic, nothing changes and the situation just gets worse.
I have a fun fact to add in, actually, too, about recycling glass, which I learned at a conference last year. You have to keep the furnace to recycle glass at such a high heat that it has to be running 24/7. Otherwise, it will collapse on itself. So just think of that. They are running constantly. They cannot turn them off. they only do it at the end of life of the furnace. So very interesting fact about glass recycling.
Oh, I love that. I mean, it's really these topics are so fascinating because it challenges what we think we know. I mean, I don't know whether you had it in the United States, but certainly in Britain when I was growing up. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, but there was bottle deposit schemes. So you didn't go to the bottle bank and smash your bottle through because you know if you go to the bottle bank and you put your bottle in, it smashes. You know that's then going to into these heap-based recycling. But you took a crate and you took your bottles in the crate back to the shop, and then you got some money back based on returning your bottles, whole bottles, and those bottles then went back into the process. They were cleaned and went back in. But it takes effort. And I think that's kind of, I suppose, one of the key things we're talking about today, isn't that? If we're actually going to move these needles, if we're going to move our businesses, if we're going to move ourselves, if we're going to inspire our kids, it takes effort.
Yeah, a fun fact about the Take Back program. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and in Michigan they'd pay you for recycling items. So I remember like on trips people would take big bags and go over the border to Michigan to get this refund for their items. One other thing I like to mention about like the refusal reuse, I'm actually creating a reel this weekend where I work with a local honey maker. I've been buying their things for years. I save the jars from the honey and I give them back to him so he can reuse them. Why recycle it when he can just wash them, sanitize them? So that's just another thing too to keep in mind, that if you have this relationship with any local makers, that you can very well do that. And that would make glass the more sustainable option if that is the case.
Yeah, I love that. And also with the honey, sorry, just completely off topic, but if you didn't know, if you have allergies, food allergies or pollen allergies, if you actually eat local honey, because it's made with the pollen that's pollinated from local plants, actually it can really help ease things like hay fever, but it's important that you actually eat the honey from a local area. Off topic, but just a fun, interesting fact about honey.
Well, jumping into to a question, you busted one myth already, but we do like to go through and ask people that join our show just to go through and invoke conversation. You don't know what you don't know, or you're not aware of what you're not aware of. But what is one myth, Stephanie, that you would like to use this platform to help bust?
Yeah, so really two. So back to the straws, I did some research. There was actually a study done in Belgium, and people think that, hey, plastic straws way more paper straw way more sustainable. But there was a study done in Belgium where 3 out of 4 straws had PFAS in it, right? PFAS is the new PCB. It's there's contamination sites everywhere. It's a very water soluble item, and it can be found in paper products and also in the grease used to keep machinery running. PFAS can be found. So 3 out of 4 straws had it in it, and then when you're drinking, it gets into your body, and it's actually, when it has PFAS in it, worse to drink out of a paper straw than a plastic straw for your body, but then better for the planet because it will in one way, I guess. But so that's really interesting so really no straw or a stainless steel straw is really your best option. And then back to the sustainable investing, that 35-year study now shows that they took $10,000 30 plus years ago, put it into sustainable funds, and then funds that were sustainable via ESG standards and standard stock, and over 10% better, right, with the returns, the growth of that 10K. So really the facts are there. And again, you're eliminating or reducing risk. So again, debunking the myth that people think sustainability costs more. You really have to have that long-term vision, and you will be more successful in the long run ultimately.
Good myths.
Well, Stephanie, you are very active. You have a magazine that's coming out, and you're on all these panels and speaking. But to the listeners of our audience, how can they find your magazine? How can they find you? Where are you going?
Yeah, so I did a recent rebrand of my website. So my company is called Purevant Living. I made up the word, like pure plant-based was my original initiative, and basically that whole lifestyle of person and planet wellness for both, right, for everybody, because it's very intimately connected. But my new domain is personandplanet.com, so very easy. Also the name of my podcast and magazine, so very easy to find. I'm very excited to announce that I'm working on the 6th issue of Person and Planet magazine and started hosting release party events in the community where it's open to everybody. A lot of the individuals that are in the magazine are there. It's like a small market, so very wellness, sustainability oriented. There's even healthy recipes in there too. It's a bit of an ode to the magazine highlights, if you remember that. I know from the 90s I was very much into that. But so the next release party event will actually be on Earth Day this year, April 22nd. And a really fun fact that people might not know is that Earth Day was originated from Wisconsin, from former Governor Gaylord Nelson in 1970. So a really interesting fun fact. So I'm very honored to be hosting the release party event on that day this year. And so more of that coming, more speaking engagements, more workshops. I know there's another fun, the International Public Markets Conference is hosted in Wisconsin this year. It does move around each year. So I'll be hosting a workshop on how to make your public market more sustainable. So very excited about that too coming up. But so I'm just spreading the word about, this connection between person and planet in creative ways. More podcast guests are coming, more creative content. So the second part will be the communications piece. So we're doing the education, the training, the consulting, and then making sure that we share the before, during, and after of what the positive impacts we're making are.
That's great. And I highly recommend Stephanie's podcast. Give it a listen. I've listened to a few episodes. I think it's really, really insightful. And also the Pale Pickle, particularly anybody with kids. It's really insightful. And it's if we open our eyes to it, we're able to educate and we're able to prevent. Great. So, Stephanie, I know that you prepared a couple of questions for Rich and I. So, come on, Rich, are you ready for the hotspot?
Oh, yeah, we get to turn this thing around.
Yeah, so I always like to ask this question on my podcast to guests, so I'm hoping that this will be fun. So, looking at sustainability and wellness, are there any weekly or daily rituals that you have that are very wellness or sustainability oriented that you'd recommend listeners try? Because we all have different things that we do that might seem normal to us, but might be an aha moment for somebody else.
Or Rich?
Yeah, so I'll go first. I've done competitive martial arts for most of my life. Started when I was in high school. Went through some bullying, got a tooth knocked out, and I started doing martial arts to try to go through and get my body strong. But what I found from martial arts, there's a couple things. Clearly there's the fitness aspect of it. You get your heart rate up. There's the training, the physical training and the combat training helped me in the military. But it was the forms, the prescribed movements, punches, kicks, pivoting your feet, landing in a certain spot. And what I learned in martial arts and what I loved about the forms was it really was the only thing that I could control. I could control how I picked up my leg, how I could kick, bring it back and land. And even though I'm not able to kick as high as I used to, I still have control over those things. So when the world just feels out of control for me, you can't tell if the technology is going to work. You can't tell how someone's going to react to a thought that you have. That's not in my control, but I could always control the movement of my body, and that's going to be a finite amount of time. But for me, I love the mental aspect of martial arts forms because it's a way that I can go through and feel like I have control over something.
Oh, that's good. I've got to follow that. So actually I've got two. So Rich and I both did this one, which we discovered when we were together a few weeks ago, which is fasting. Rich said about control, I say about discipline. I fast for for health benefits, and it's very good for atrophy, which is a rejuvenation of cells. And so I tend to try and at least fast for 5 to 6 days a week. I don't fast 7 days a week because I have to have some fun. And let's face it, I am British and I do go to the pub every now and again. So, but certainly fasting, because I find that it centers me. I find that it gives me, like I said, the discipline and the control. And also, it gives me the health benefits. So, and also for me, it was a big guide for weight loss for me. I managed to move quite a few pounds through having that control. And so for me, and longevity and health and life and everything that goes with it, fasting for me has been a phenomenal thing for my own well-being. But the second thing, and Steph has me use something that I do every day, and there is, I do affirmations, not in the mirror, not, grounding and standing in the lawn with a coffee, but just very much as I rise and wake up in the morning, I think about the day. I think, what have I got on today? And I suppose it's affirmation, it's manifestation, it's, what do I want out of today? What do I want to achieve out of today? What's today going to be like for me if it's going to be a good day? And I try and start the day with key elements really set to say, okay, this is what I would like to achieve out of today. And so, so just quietly, when I wake up, I spend maybe 5-10 minutes just lying there, thinking about the day and just setting my intention. And I just find it helps me, get up with the right attitude for the day. It doesn't always work, but I do try.
I love that. Those are both really good examples.
Oh, that's fab, Stephanie. Well, thank you so much for joining us on our show today. You've been such a wonderful guest. And, with the work that you do, and it's so important, I think, because it's education. And it's that mindset shift, and it's that intent. It's the intent with the self. So, I want to say a personal, great big thank you. And definitely check your podcast out. I think you're on 3 series now, is it? And it's a really, really good listen. So, thank you very much. But I'll hand it to Rich to close off the episode.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie, again, thank you very much. Very enlightening conversation, and I look forward to seeing you on shows. It's small. It's impressive how small this world is, but it's been a joy to get to know you, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
All right.
Super. Thank you.
We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thanks for tuning in. Please head over to allthingscircular.com to learn more.